My name is Jasper. I'm 35 years old and I work as an executive at a tech company. 6 months ago, if you'd asked me what I thought about marriage, I probably would have said it was one of the best things in my life. But now, I just feel exhausted. That night, I was once again sitting alone in our apartment with a glass of whiskey in my hand. Outside the window was a bustling city night, seen with bright lights and traffic. At the moment, however, it all made me feel incredibly lonely. My marriage to Genevieve was like one of those wobbly neon signs outside the window, ready to go out at any moment. I can't help but think back to that night 6 months ago that changed everything. It was our third wedding anniversary, and I had booked the best restaurant in town. Genevieve looked radiant, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I remember every word she said. "Honey, I have an idea. How about we try an open marriage?" At that moment, I felt like my world had turned upside down. I tried to understand what she was thinking. Maybe it was just a whim. Maybe she just wanted to add some excitement to our relationship. But deep inside me, a voice kept asking, "What's wrong with our love?" Over the next few days, we made some rules. To be honest, I thought they were ridiculous. No overnight stays, regular checkups, emotional distance. Sounds like a dangerous game to me, not a marriage. For the first few weeks, life didn't seem to change much. But slowly the cracks began to show. Genevieve was coming home later and later, sometimes staying out all night. I remember once, at 2:30 a.m., I was lying in bed, listening to the sound of my bedroom door being gently pushed open. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, but in the back of my mind I wondered, did she smell like someone else now? Work became my only safe haven. I buried myself in endless meetings and projects, trying to escape the home that was falling apart. One afternoon, while leading an important meeting, my cell phone lit up. It was a text from Genevieve. "Not coming home for dinner tonight. Have an important date?" I remember freezing for a moment and then continuing the meeting as if nothing had happened. But what hurt me the most was our fourth wedding anniversary. I took a special vacation to surprise her. I spent the whole day cleaning the house and preparing her favorite dishes. At 7 p.m., I sat at the dining room table and stared across the room at the empty seats, not moving a muscle. It wasn't until midnight that I got a text from her. "Sorry, honey, I have an important work party tonight, so I might be late. Don't wait up for me." I stared at that text message for a long time, then silently dumped my meal into the trash. At that moment, I suddenly realized that our marriage might be irreparable. It's been 5 months and I feel like an optional supporting character in our once sweet love story. I keep asking myself, is there any reason to continue this relationship? Am I just sacrificing my own happiness to fulfill her new life? Despite this, Genevieve doesn't seem to break any of the rules we agreed upon. Whenever I try to talk to her, suggesting that maybe she should stop this open relationship, she always laughed it off and told me that I was overreacting and that it was just some harmless game. But I knew that our relationship had reached a tipping point. Something had to change or else our marriage would be like a carefully constructed sandcastle slowly crumbling under the tide until there was nothing left. Life is like a runaway train. You never know what's going to happen at the next stop. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, fate dealt me a blow. Later that night, I was once again sitting alone in the same bar we always went to. Genevieve said she had an important date, and I didn't bother to ask for details. Jim, the bartender, nodded at me and silently poured me a second scotch. He's probably used to me looking like I've lost my mind. "Jasper!" A soft female voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw a familiar and unfamiliar face. "Kate? Oh my God, it's really you." I said in surprise. "Kate is my classmate in college, and now she is a famous painter. We haven't seen each other for almost 10 years. She smiled and sat down next to me, and we chatted about the old days. Without realizing it, I found myself confiding in her about Genevieve and me. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it had just been too long since anyone had really listened to me. "You know, Jasper," Kate said thoughtfully, "sometimes when we get so focused on saving a relationship, we forget to take care of ourselves instead." Her words were like a bolt of lightning that illuminated the fog inside me. I suddenly realized that in trying to save my marriage, I had long lost myself. The next day, I ghosted over to Kate's studio. It was a creative and energizing place, with her work all over the walls. We talked a lot about art, about life, about those dreams we once had but lost. "Let me paint your portrait," Kate suddenly suggested, as a gift for an old friend. Just like that, I sat there and watched Kate concentrate on her painting. The sunlight poured through the window onto her face, and at that moment, I felt something in my heart flutter slightly. However, the good times didn't last long. One night, while Kate and I were chatting in the living room, Genevieve suddenly returned. She had a complicated look on her face. I saw surprise, confusion, and a hint of undetectable jealousy. "Looks like you made a new friend too?" Genevieve forced a smile, but I could feel the sourness in her tone. "This is Kate. I went to college with her. She's a painter now," I explained, feeling inexplicably guilty. Kate quickly excused herself, leaving Genevieve and I in an awkward silence. That night we lay in bed, back to back. I could feel Genevieve's breathing, but felt like she was so far away. "Genevieve, we need to talk," I finally got up the courage to say. "Tomorrow. I'm tired," she replied coldly. I stared out the window at the moonlight with mixed feelings. I knew that our marriage had gone over a cliff. The next afternoon, we met at our usual cafe. Genevieve looked tired and anxious, and I guessed I wasn't much better. "I think our marriage is in trouble," I said bluntly. "What, you and that painter?" Genevieve's tone was laced with sarcasm. "No, the problem is us." I interrupted her. "We've lost each other. Genevieve, do you remember the vows we made when we got married? We said we would face the ups and downs of life together. But now, we don't even have the most basic trust anymore." Genevieve was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, I heard the tremor in her voice. "Jasper, I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe we really have gone too far." It was at that moment that I suddenly realized that our marriage might actually be beyond repair. This realization pierced my heart like a sharp blade. We just sat there, two people who used to love each other, but now we were like two strangers. People were coming and going and laughing in the coffee shop, and all that was left between us was a heavy silence. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that starting today, nothing will ever be the same again. It's often said that when you hit bottom, the only direction is up. But sometimes, when you think you've hit bottom, life can still give you a deeper pit. I came home one night to find the living room in shambles. Empty wine bottles were strewn all over the floor, magazines and newspapers littered the coffee table. Genevieve was lying drunk on the couch with half a bottle of red wine in his hand. "Hey, you're back?" she slurred. "Want a drink?" I sighed and silently began to clean up my room. This scene was becoming more and more common lately. Genevieve seemed to have completely and utterly let herself go since that day we talked at the cafe. She started drinking frequently, sometimes even staying out all night. Our marriage was like a sinking ship, and we had, both of us, lost the impetus to rescue it. The next morning, I quietly left the house and went straight to the lawyer's office. As I sat across from the lawyer and looked at the divorce papers on the table, I had mixed feelings. "Jasper, are you sure you want to take this step?" the lawyer asked, a hint of sympathy in his tone. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, we all need to start over." The moment I signed, I felt like I was signing the death warrant for my own marriage, and after telling Genevieve again, I felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps this really was the best possible ending. That evening, I went to Kate's painting show. The exhibit hall was packed, and Kate's work was getting a lot of praise. I stood in front of a painting and froze. It was Kate's portrait of me, but in the painting I had complex eyes, both confused and hopeful. "Well, is it still satisfactory?" Kate stood beside me at some point. "It's great," I said heartily. "You really captured I can't quite put my finger on it." Kate smiled. "Maybe it's your internal struggle, Jasper. In all the years we've known each other, I've never seen you so lost." I was about to say something when my cell phone suddenly rang. It was Genevieve that I hesitated but picked it up. "Jasper, where are you?" Genevieve's voice sounded urgent. "Can we talk?" I looked at Kate and she nodded at me, signaling me to go ahead. When I got home, it was almost midnight. Genevieve stood in the doorway, looking haggard. "Please, give us a chance," she cried. "I know I've done a lot of things wrong, but I really love you." I felt a pang of heartache. There was a time when this woman was the most important person in my life. And now, this is what we have become. Genevieve, I whispered, it's too late. She broke down and crouched on the floor, crying in pain. I stood there, at a loss for words. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. In the end, I just silently poured her a glass of water and went back to my room. The next morning, we both unspokenly avoided last night's events. Genevieve seemed much calmer and even offered to go to court with me. In the courtroom, the judge read the ruling in a voice that sounded like it was coming from a long way off. Before the divorce becomes official, the court recommends that you undergo 8 weeks of marriage counseling. Genevieve and I looked at each other in disbelief. 8 weeks? That was like a century long for us. As we walked out of the courthouse, Genevieve suddenly took my hand. Jasper, maybe this is God's last chance for us? I looked at her, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. Should I continue with this marriage, which was already full of holes, or let it go completely? I found myself surprisingly unable to make a decision. In that moment, I suddenly realized that maybe our story wasn't over. Maybe, in these 8 weeks, we'll find a way to start over. Or maybe, we'll realize once and for all that it's time to say goodbye. In any case, I know that the next few days are going to be a difficult journey of restoration. And I, for one, can only take one step at a time. Life is like a theater of the absurd, and just when you think you've seen the end, the scriptwriter always manages to give you a twist that catches you off guard. The day of our first marriage counseling session, Genevieve and I sat across from the counselor like two strangers. An awkward silence filled the room, as if the air had frozen. The counselor, a kindly middle-aged woman, smiled and asked, "Tell me, what made you decide to try open marriage?" Genevieve and I looked at each other, neither one willing to speak first. Finally, Genevieve whispered, "I thought it would make our relationship more interesting, more exciting." I couldn't help but sneer, "Yes, how interesting. Funny enough that we're sitting here right now talking about divorce." The counselor nodded thoughtfully. "Jasper, can you tell me what you thought when Genevieve suggested this?" I took a deep breath. Honestly, I feel hurt. I thought something was wrong with our relationship, and she wanted to fix it that way. And so began our long 8 weeks of counseling. Each meeting was like an emotional tug of war. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we were silent, and sometimes we even shed tears. But strangely enough, as time went on, I felt as if the walls between us were slowly melting away. One evening during the 4th week, I was jogging alone in the park. The autumn evening breeze was a little cool, and the leaves rustled under my feet. Suddenly, the ringing of the cell phone broke the quiet of the night. "Hello, is this Mr. Jasper?" An unfamiliar female voice came through. "Your wife Genevieve has been in a car accident and is in the emergency room." I felt the blood in my body instantly freeze. No matter what happened before, Genevieve was always the closest person to me. I immediately turned around and ran furiously towards the hospital, my heart beating so fast it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. By the time I reached the hospital, I was out of breath. The doctor told me that Genevieve was only slightly bruised, but needed to stay in the hospital overnight for safety reasons. When I walked into the hospital room and saw her lying there safe and sound, my heart finally dropped. "Hey," Genevieve smiled weakly. "Sorry to worry you." I sat down on the edge of the bed and unconsciously took her hand. "Don't say anything stupid. I'm glad you're okay." It was at that moment that I suddenly realized that no matter what had happened between us, I still cared deeply about this woman. All those memories that were once so beautiful came flooding back. Our first encounter, our first date, the look of surprise on her face when I asked her to marry me. "Jasper," Genevieve whispered, interrupting my thoughts. "I'm sorry I've been hurting you. I thought an open marriage would make our relationship better, but I was wrong. I was just scared of losing you." I looked at her reddened eyes and felt a pang in my heart. "Shoo, don't talk. The important thing is that you're okay. We have time to talk slowly." That night, I stayed by Genevieve's bedside, reflecting on the years we'd shared. Maybe our marriage wasn't as hopeless as I thought. Maybe we had a chance to start over. The next morning, I went to the hospital to pick up Genevieve from the hospital. The sun was shining and there was a light breeze, as if the whole world was new. We decided to take a walk home together and slowly talked about all that had happened over the years. Do you remember how we met? Genevieve asked suddenly. I laughed. Of course I remember. The college library. You spilled coffee on my laptop. God, I was embarrassed as hell at that point. Genevieve smiled back. But you were a gentleman and said it was okay and bought me a cup of coffee. And so we did, walking and talking along the way, reminiscing about those good times. I suddenly realized that maybe the feelings between us hadn't disappeared. They were just covered up by the trivialities and misunderstandings of life. When we got home, Genevieve looked at me with hope and uncertainty in his eyes. Jasper, do you think? Do we have a chance? I looked deep into her eyes and saw the girl I once loved so much. I know that there is still a long way to go to fix our relationship, but at least, we now have the courage to start over. Maybe, I whispered, we can try. And just like that, our story took an unexpected turn. Life is always full of surprises, sometimes bad, sometimes good. And I, at last, saw a ray of hope. It is often said that love is a choice. After all I've been through, I finally understand the meaning of this saying. The days after Genevieve was discharged from the hospital were like a return to the early days of our relationship, cautious and full of anticipation. I accompanied her for a walk in the park, the sunlight gently sprinkled on her face, reminding me of the girl in college who always smiled. Jasper, Genevieve said softly, thank you for this time. I stopped and crouched down to look at her levelly. Hey, we had a deal, good times and bad, right? She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Yeah, we had a deal. In that moment, I felt as if the walls between us melted away a little more. In the time that followed, we had a lot of time alone and talking. We talked about happy times in the past, and were honest about the problems in the marriage. You know, Genevieve said out of the blue one night, I proposed open marriage, actually, out of fear. I was a little confused. Scared of what? She took a deep breath. The fear that our relationship would become flat, that you would get tired of me. I thought it would make our relationship more exciting, but I was wrong. I almost screwed everything up. I held her hand. Genevieve, I'm at fault too. I should have been braver and expressed my feelings instead of just retreating and running away. And so, little by little, we sorted through the past and tried to rebuild our trust in each other. At the last marriage counseling session, the counselor smiled and said, I see a lot of progress between you. Genevieve quietly took my hand, and I could feel the warmth and slight tremble in her palm. Walking out of the counseling room, the sun was so bright that you couldn't open your eyes. Genevieve suddenly stopped and turned to face me. Jasper, I know we still have a long way to go, but will you walk with me? I looked into her expectant and apprehensive eyes, and a warmth welled up in my heart. We've been through so much, and perhaps it's the ups and downs that have made our relationship more mature and deep. I do, I whispered. Let's start over. Genevieve's eyes lit up, and in that moment, it was as if I was seeing the sunny girl from when we first met again. The following days, we started to rebuild our lives. We decided to move and get a new environment. Packing up, we turned over many dusty memories. Our wedding photos, souvenirs from our honeymoon, sketches I had clumsily made on our first date. God, you suck at drawing, Genevieve said with a laugh. But I still treasure it to this day. I grabbed the sketch pretending to be angry. Hey, at least you recognize it's you. We just laughed and laughed as if we were back in the beginning when we first fell in love. The day we moved into our new home, we decided to throw a small restart party. Only the closest friends and family were invited. As we stood in the doorway of our new home and greeted our guests, I felt a sense of groundedness and happiness that I had never felt before. At night, after the party, Genevieve and I sat on the balcony of our new home, looking out at the starry city lights. Jasper, Genevieve whispered against my shoulder, thank you for not giving up on us. I put my arm around her shoulders. Thank you for giving us the courage to start over. We smiled at each other, and then looked into the distance in unison. The future is still full of unknowns, and we may still encounter various challenges and difficulties. But this time, we chose to walk hand in hand and face it together. At that moment, I suddenly realized that love is never smooth sailing. It requires us to keep choosing, keep working hard, and keep starting over. And it is these choices and efforts that make our relationship more precious. I gently kissed Genevieve's forehead and silently made a promise in my heart. This time, we will treasure each other and our renewed happiness. Because I know that true love is worth starting over again and again until we find the best in each other. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.